Greetings guys and ladies as well. Today I'm revisiting my Craftsman Floor Jack. It's had a problem lately with the handle come back up being pressurized, and I finally pretty sure I traced it out to the top check ball it's holding. Mine is a Sears Craftsman 328.12002 jack. It dates back to the late 60s or 70s. As you can see, this creates a very unsafe condition, making the jack about impossible to use, so definitely got to tear into it to see what I can do about fixing this. This is going to be a start to finish teardown, so first thing to get off is to go ahead and take off the main handle itself. Obviously I've got it cranked back all the way so I can make sure the jack is not pressurized. And there are two bolts, one on either side, have to be taken off. So I'm going to go ahead and get those off. You'll note that the one on my right also has a spring, and that spring's going to want to come out in a hell of a hurry once I get this bolt completely loose, so be wary of that one catching anything. It tends to go shooting across the room. This is the take your time portion of the show. It pays to have someone else help you by holding the handle up. We don't have to hold the handle up at the same time, because again, that little spring is going to come popping out here pretty soon. And when it does, you want to make sure nobody gets hit with it. It usually stays kind of low, but still, again, make sure you're wearing some type of eye protection just in case. Now it's time to take the handle off. Just make sure you've got it turned all the way so you can be absolutely certain there's no pressure in the jack. Then a little bit of wiggling should let it come free here. It'll just take a couple back and forth and it'll work its way out. Now it's time for the extreme finger mashing part of the show. As you can see here, I've got it propped up on an empty but sealed antifreeze container. This helps get the jack off the floor and saves my fingers when I have to get back underneath it. It helps to have the wheel turned away from you. That way you can get the ratchet in there and get a hold of each bolt. And these are 3/4 inch in case you're curious. The front bolt goes into the side plate. The rear bolt goes into the power unit. Just remember, once you get that rear bolt out, it's free and the power unit can drop with respect to the side plate on that side. One great finger mashing experience. Trust me on this. Okay, now it's time to flip the jack over, but in this case I'm going to sit it on its side. You'll see why in just a minute. I've already broke the bolts free, and you can see I'm just taking them out with my fingers here. Once you have those two bolts free, you want to leave the jack on its side. The next thing I'm going to do is take the power unit out. The power unit is now free, so I'm going to go ahead and pivot it out so I can access the cotter pin and the return spring. Now, as you're doing this, remember the power unit is still full of oil in this case. So we're going to have to drain the oil out before we can do anything with the actual unit itself. Just remember not to pull the little actuation lever out this time. Now, using a pair of needle nose pliers and possibly a set of vice grips, maybe a pry bar, it's time to go ahead and get the cotter pin out. In this case, I used a scratch awl to get it started, and then needle nose pliers to work it back and forth, and eventually, of course, you see the pin comes out. Once you get the pin out, the next step is to disconnect the return spring. Makes it real easy now that the unit is fully decompressed and there's very little tension on the spring. Once you get the spring off, just slide the power unit out of its mounting bracket and set it upright, and you're ready to move on to disassembling a power unit. Now we're ready to drain the power unit. Best thing to do is find you a fairly large flat pan. It can be metal or plastic, as I'm using in this case. First thing I'm going to do is remove the fill plug. Make sure you don't damage this. You're going to definitely need it when you put it back together. Time to remove the actuating piston by pulling it straight up. After that, we're just going to go ahead and drain the power unit. Here comes decision time. If you have no idea when it was that the jack had brand new oil in it, it's probably best to go ahead and replace the oil. Just plan on making a trip to the parts store or Walmart and picking you up about 2 small containers of jack oil. Next on my list of things to do is go ahead and take out the 2 check balls and make sure they're in good shape. To do that, of course, I've got to take this little cover out completely. It just unscrews. Once you get it out, the little check balls dump right out. You want to check the check balls over thoroughly just to make sure that there's nothing wrong with them and they're definitely completely round and very smooth. Now I'm going to take the top cover off, in this case, to check it and make sure that there's no trash inside the cylinder, either inside or outside the main ram. I want to be absolutely sure everything's clean, so I'm going to blow it all out with compressed air and just check it throughout thoroughly. In this case, I'm taking this top cover off with a 14-inch pipe wrench. Ideally, I'd want a smooth wrench, but if yours hasn't been disassembled, you may even have to use a much bigger pipe wrench to get it loose. They are really tight when they haven't been taken off in a while. My next project is taking the main ram cylinder out. In my case, it's got a new seal on it, so it's very, very tight. If you're rebuilding it and having to replace this seal, it'll come right out with no effort whatsoever. If you're planning on replacing this seal, there's a snap ring on the end of the cylinder. You remove the snap ring, that allows you access to remove the seal. If you're rebuilding the complete jack, there's a little suction screen on the end of the cylinder. Behind the little suction screen, once you get it out, is a check ball and a spring. Some kits include this check ball, some don't. Okay, here's my current plan to fix my jack. In this case, the new item is a spring, and it basically came out of my junk box. I collect a whole bunch of hardware, and this just happened to be one of the springs I had. It's about 15 millimeters long, 7 inside, 9 outside, and fairly stiff. So this is what I'm planning on using as far as increasing the tension on my check ball. The little plunger portion of the cover is right at 7 millimeters. I had to crimp the spring slightly to get it to hold on to the end of the cover. That way the spring can't fall off as I'm inserting it into the jack. My solution to give me a little bit more spring tension was to add a little lock washer that's about 1 millimeter thick between the spring and the bottom of the cover where it recesses to slide the spring on. This gave me a little bit more initial tension. My first trial fit did not give me much in the way of spring compression until I almost touched down with the cover, so I decided I'd add a little bit more in there. My next little chore is to go ahead and reinstall a little actuator plunger. Now it's time to reinstall the main actuator piston. In order to avoid damaging this new seal, I think the best way to do it is kind of roll it in action. Just kind of do a little rotation motion. Eventually it will pop in place. Now, as you've noticed here, this seal is extremely tight, so I'm only going to be able to get it so far. Now, actually, this is not a problem, and you'll see why later on in the video. Now, with both the seal and the piston started in the bore, I'm going to go ahead and put the top cover back on and screw it all down and get it good and tight. When it comes to putting on and taking off this cover, it definitely pays to have a bench vise. Chances are without a bench vise, you're definitely not going to be able to get the cover off, even with a very large pipe wrench, because there's simply just no way to hold the power unit without a vise. I'll do the final tightening of the cover and the bench vise off camera. Now it's time to reinstall the power unit, and if you left the jack exactly where it was whenever you took the power unit out, you're in perfect shape to put the unit right back in. Now it's time to reinstall the cotter pin, and ideally you should use a new cotter pin. Sort of makes the process a lot easier. Just a cotter pin and needle nose pliers and you should be all set to go. Now if you're paying close attention, you'll see I screwed up here. I forgot to hook up the return spring. Actually, it's not a major problem. I found out you can hook it right back up from the top of the jack with a mechanic's pick. It took me about a half a dozen tries, but with the jack fully retracted, you can reach in there, grab the spring, and pull it over and then put it on its proper keeper. So if you do make this mistake, it's not a deal killer. You'll have to take a jack all the way back apart. Several things to pay close attention to. You'll note that there is a pin on the left of the video. This has got 2 holes it's got to be in, and you definitely have to get this pin back in the jack. And it keeps popping in and popping out if you move the jack around. Now I've got 3 problems in the video. You'll note that the power unit and its bracket are out of square. In this case, it means the lower pivot that I can't see is not in its hole, and the pin to the left is not in its proper holes. I had to make an adjustment on these off camera. It just takes a little while, and again, I'm on the wrong side, so I can't see it. Now I'm going to reinstall one of the rear wheels. I'm not going to bore you with all the wrenching, so I'll just skip over the wrenching part. Once I've got all the pins back in place and everything is squared up, the next project I've got to do is go ahead and retract the plunger. Now, the only real way to do this and get it quickly back in place is to go ahead and set the jack up right, and then its own weight will drive the plunger home, as you'll see here. Just make sure your finger's out of the way because this can really mash them good. Now it's time to set the jack up on the other side, and as you'll no doubt notice here, one side is sitting on the concrete that doesn't have the wheel on it, so it's a little difficult to grab a hold of. You just got to take your time and flip it over, just being real careful you don't get your fingers underneath it when you set it back down, but ideally it should come to rest on the side just like you see it here. Once it's on the side, I'm going to go ahead and put this other wheel back on the back. Now this one's the fun one, not the front one, the back one. The power unit wants to move around with respect to the side plate, so it really pays to have two people here, one to hold the plates and one to thread the bolt. It'll take you multiple tries here, and you'll have to try to hold the plates stable with respect to the power unit to get the bolt to start. Now, if you manage to get this far with no mashed fingers, blood blisters, or cuts, you're probably a better man than me. I actually cut my finger once and didn't even know where I cut it. I didn't know it was even bleeding until I noticed blood on the concrete. Now it's time to refill the jack. Generally it takes probably less than one of these bottles, and again I bought this particular oil at Walmart. Since I tore into the jack about a year ago, I decided to collect the oil, filter it real well, and then go ahead and use the same oil back in the jack. I've tightened up all the bolts off camera, so now it's time to reinstall the handle. The actuator pin in the jack handle does have a flat spot on it. In all honesty, I've never figured out whether it's good to have the flat spot up or flat spot down. Next thing to do is go ahead and slide the handle in place, catching the actuator pin in the little fork there. Now I'm just going to barely slide in the right side bolt, and I'm going to try to barely catch the spring just to hold the spring in place. Here once again it pays to have two people, one to hold the handle and one to manipulate the bolts. Now the one on the left side without the spring generally starts fairly easy. The one on the right side with the spring can be a royal pain. What I've generally found out is if you tap on the bolt and then slowly try to tighten the bolt, it will usually catch that way. Tap, then tighten, tap, then tighten. You just want to get the spring started on the bolt end as you're working with it, and then finally pop it back in place once the bolt starts to take the thread. What I'm doing now is I deliberately left the cover over the check balls a little bit loose and then pumped the jack up a couple of times just to vent any air that was in the check ball area. I know I've got all the air out. Go ahead and tighten it all back up. Now it's time to go ahead and get all the air out of the rest of the jack. Best way to do this is go ahead and pump the jack all the way up to its maximum extent of travel and then continue to pump the handle for a little bit. That way you'll purge all the air that remains in the jack out of the jack. I usually like to do this 2 or 3 times before I actually put a load on the jack. After you cycle the jack at maximum travel for 2 or 3 strokes, then totally let the jack all the way back down and repeat the procedure. I do it again at least 2 times. Okay, here's the money shot. I'm going to go ahead and pump the same car back up with the same jack in the same location. Get the front wheel up off the ground and see if she'll leak back down. And as you can see, the jack is holding, and I'm quite happy right now. That little spring in the check ball fixed things nicely. Hope you found this video useful. If you did, give me a like and consider subscribing. Just might have a few more things coming down here real soon you're going to want to see. The king in the video just might be gone, but don't let that be you too. So come on back and see me real soon.